The corridor camera covering the West Gallery had been offline for exactly 3 minutes. When it returned, the restricted service door behind the tapestry was slightly ajar. A child's polished shoe lay just inside the threshold, positioned neatly, as if placed there. The royal guard assigned to evening escort paused at the frame. No entry had been logged. No alarm had sounded. Something inside the palace had shifted. The operations room was kept deliberately cool, the temperature steady to preserve both equipment and focus, and the royal guard preferred it that way. The faint hum of the monitors and the low vibration of the ventilation system created a controlled atmosphere that contrasted with the ceremonial brightness waiting outside in the courtyard. He stood before the central console reviewing routine security summaries prior to escorting the senior royal to a private evening function, a task that required precision but rarely deviation. His gloved hand moved across the touch panel, scrolling through corridor feeds, not because he distrusted the system, but because habit demanded confirmation beyond assumption. The restricted West Service corridor appeared briefly in the sequence log with a red timestamp indicator, an interruption of 16 seconds. Camera interference was uncommon inside interior palace grounds, where wiring ran shielded and redundant. He leaned slightly closer to the screen, posture still upright, eyes steady, and replayed the segment. Static dissolved into restored footage. The corridor reappeared under warm overhead lighting, polished stone reflecting faintly beneath polished shoes. At the edge of the frame stood the senior royal, identifiable by posture and tailored evening attire, prepared for the function. One hand placed firmly around the upper arm of a young palace attendant. The child, no more than 13 by appearance, wore the standard light livery assigned to interior support staff. The grip was not frantic, not overtly violent. It was controlled, directional. The senior royal guided the child toward the narrow service door positioned outside authorized guest routes. The door should have required logged clearance. No such clearance appeared on the movement record. The guard's jaw tightened subtly, though his expression remained composed. He rewound the footage again, examining the body language rather than the act itself. The child's free hand hovered uncertainly, fingers slightly curled inward, shoulders angled back as if resisting without daring to pull away. There was no visible struggle. There was something else, hesitation. The service door opened from the inside, suggesting prior access coding. Both figures disappeared through it. The timestamp resumed normally. He checked the adjacent corridor camera. It had not captured an exit. The guard accessed the authorization log for that zone. Blank. No override. No maintenance alert. His escort duty required him in the East Wing within 9 minutes. He removed his gloves slowly, exposing his palm to re-enter secure credentials manually, ensuring no automated filter had omitted a record. Still nothing. The hum of the monitors seemed louder now, or perhaps his awareness had sharpened around it. He knew palace hierarchy allowed certain privileges, informal movements that did not always pass through standard booking systems, yet restricted corridors involving minors required notation under safeguarding statutes introduced quietly 2 years earlier. He had signed acknowledgement of that policy. He restored the footage once more and watched the moment of contact frame by frame. The senior royal's expression remained unreadable, composed. The child's eyes lowered before the camera angle shifted. The guard straightened. Escort protocol demanded punctual presence. Safeguarding protocol demanded immediate inquiry. He checked the schedule. Departure to the private function in 7 minutes. The senior royal was expected at the grand stairwell. The service corridor lay in the opposite direction. He placed his glove back on, slow and deliberate, aware that any step taken outside sequence would be visible to superiors. He powered down the replay screen and turned toward the corridor exit, the weight of ceremonial authority resting evenly on his shoulders, but the footage replaying in his mind with quiet insistence. He stepped into the marble passageway leading toward the grand stairwell, boots landing with measured cadence against the polished floor, posture unbroken, expression neutral to any passing staff. The palace lighting had shifted toward evening warmth, chandeliers casting elongated reflections along the walls, adorned with ancestral portraits whose painted gazes seemed permanently fixed on ceremony rather than scrutiny. He maintained standard pace, neither hurried nor delayed, yet his internal calculations adjusted with each step. If he diverted immediately toward the West Service Corridor without authorization, he would be required to explain deviation from escort assignment. If he proceeded with escort and ignored the footage, the child would remain unseen within an unlogged area. He passed a junior aide who offered a nod. He returned it with minimal acknowledgement, conserving focus. Nearing the grand stairwell, he could already hear distant preparations, subdued conversation, the rustle of formal garments, the muted clink of glassware being arranged for departure. The senior royal would expect efficiency. He paused briefly at a side console integrated into the wall and accessed corridor status through his wrist device under the guise of routine confirmation. The West Service Corridor still displayed no new entries, no exit. The absence was more telling than noise would have been. He considered requesting immediate backup through standard channels, but understood the implication. A recorded query regarding a senior royal's movement would trigger review before context could be assessed, potentially escalating into public sensitivity. His role demanded discretion as much as vigilance. He reached the grand stairwell landing and observed the senior royal in conversation with a private secretary, posture composed, expression untroubled. There was no visible sign of haste or irregularity. The guard positioned himself at regulation distance, offering the formal incline of acknowledgement. He studied the royal's sleeve briefly. No visible disturbance, cuff immaculate. If the interaction in the corridor had been forceful beyond appearance, there would likely have been signs of agitation. There were none. The secretary concluded the briefing and stepped aside. The senior royal met the guard's eyes briefly, a neutral glance signaling readiness to proceed. The guard returned the look without challenge. Escort departure was scheduled within 3 minutes. He allowed the silence to stretch a fraction longer than usual, then activated his earpiece quietly, transmitting a coded instruction to the internal monitoring desk. Confirm environmental sweep West Service Corridor, priority level amber. It was not an accusation. It was a procedural request masked within routine phrasing. The response came with restrained acknowledgement. The senior royal began descending the staircase. The guard followed half a step behind, maintaining protective angle. From this position, he could not see the west corridor, could not confirm the child's condition, and yet he had initiated movement that would soon draw attention. As they reached the lower hall, a subtle vibration signaled an incoming message from monitoring, camera review en route, physical patrol en route. The guard maintained escort formation, face impassive, aware that within minutes he might be required to choose between halting a royal departure or allowing it to proceed under unresolved concern. The palace doors ahead opened to the evening air, cool and composed. He stepped forward with the senior royal into the fading light, tension contained behind ceremony, knowing the next decision would not remain procedural for long. The evening air carried a mild chill as the palace doors closed behind them, sealing the senior royal and his escort within the insulated quiet of the motorcade forecourt. The stone beneath their feet still held the day's warmth, but the air had shifted, thinner, sharper against exposed skin. The royal guard maintained his assigned position at the royal's left rear quarter, eyes scanning the perimeter with disciplined precision while waiting for confirmation from internal monitoring. The vehicles were aligned in formal symmetry, engines silent, drivers poised. Nothing outward suggested disruption, yet beneath the visible order, his earpiece delivered a muted update. Patrol en route to the West Service Corridor. No child movement logged since prior shift. The absence of a movement record tightened his focus further. The safeguarding statutes were explicit. Any minor within palace employment required documented relocation between zones, regardless of rank requesting the movement. He inhaled slowly, controlling breath to preserve steady cadence. Escort protocol demanded departure within 2 minutes to maintain schedule at the private function. He stepped forward and, in a tone neutral enough to avoid implication, informed the senior royal that a brief perimeter re-verification was required due to an interior systems anomaly. The explanation was precise, unspecific, and not inaccurate. The senior royal's expression altered only slightly, an almost imperceptible narrowing of the eyes, before returning to practiced composure. "Proceed efficiently," the royal replied, voice even. The guard inclined his head and signaled discreetly to the lead driver to hold position. He rerouted the walking path toward the covered colonnade rather than directly to the vehicle door, maintaining formality while altering trajectory. This placed them closer to the interior security access point without overtly reversing course. The palace lighting along the colonnade cast long shadows between columns. The sound of their steps echoed with measured restraint. In his peripheral vision, he observed the senior royal's posture, calm, unhurried, neither confrontational nor cooperative beyond expectation. The guard accessed the corridor log again through his wrist console while walking. Still no record of the young attendant's reassignment. No exit swipe registered from the restricted zone. A secondary alert appeared. Patrol approaching service corridor threshold. Door closed. No audible disturbance detected. He knew that entering a restricted interior zone while assigned to escort required justification. Yet allowing departure from palace grounds while an unaccounted minor remained within a restricted area posed greater liability under safeguarding mandate. He slowed slightly, enough to suggest structural caution rather than hesitation. "Security requires internal confirmation before departure," he stated evenly. The senior royal stopped walking. Silence settled between the columns, broken only by distant traffic beyond the gates. "Is there a concern?" the royal asked, tone measured, neither defensive nor yielding. The guard met his gaze briefly, careful to avoid confrontation. "A procedural discrepancy, sir." He did not elaborate. He transmitted a second coded instruction. "Hold motorcade clearance pending interior sweep." The response came slower this time. He felt the weight of visibility, cameras, aides, drivers, all observing without understanding. The next message from monitoring arrived compressed. Service corridor door secured from within. Patrol awaiting override authority. The guard understood what that meant. Someone inside retained control access. He maintained posture, aware that whatever choice he made in the next moments would be recorded, reviewed, and interpreted beyond the immediate scene. He requested temporary return to the interior on the grounds of verifying the anomaly before public departure, framing it as risk mitigation for the evening's engagement. The senior royal regarded him steadily, assessing whether the delay constituted procedural caution or subtle defiance. After a measured pause, the royal gestured once, granting movement without explicit approval. The guard pivoted smoothly, guiding the route back toward the side entrance beneath the colonnade. 2 additional officers fell into step at a respectful distance, sensing deviation without being briefed. Inside, the ambient warmth of the palace contrasted with the cool air outside. Polished floors reflected the overhead lights in steady bands. His earpiece relayed an update. Patrol reports faint movement within the preparation room adjacent to the service corridor. No response to standard knock. He felt the internal alignment of training and instinct sharpen into clarity. Override authorization required, came the next transmission. He held authority over restricted access zones during active security anomalies, though invoking it in relation to a senior royal's last known movement would escalate review. He paused at the console, entering his credentials with deliberate steadiness. The system requested confirmation twice. He confirmed. The lock disengaged remotely, with a muted click echoed faintly through the corridor feed. He did not look at the senior royal immediately. Instead, he focused on the sequence of action, ensuring nothing appeared reactive. "We will verify and proceed," he stated, level. The royal's expression remained composed, but a stillness settled around him that differed from earlier calm, less neutral, more evaluative. They advanced toward the west interior junction. The corridor lighting there was dimmer, designed for service staff rather than formal passage, casting narrower shadows against stone. One secondary officer briefed him quietly. No sign of forced entry. Door was latched from inside. The guard acknowledged without comment. He understood that whatever lay beyond the preparation room door would determine not only the evening's schedule, but the interpretation of his conduct. If nothing irregular was found, his delay would appear excessive. If the child was present without clearance, silence would no longer be procedural. As they approached the final turn toward the service corridor, he noticed the subtle absence of ambient sound. No cartwheels, no distant staff conversation. The palace often carried a soft operational murmur even at quieter hours. Here there was only still air and the faint hum of electrical fixtures. He signaled the secondary officer to remain half a step behind while he advanced toward the preparation room door that connected to the service passage. His hand hovered near the handle, aware that crossing this threshold would move the matter beyond anomaly into confrontation. Behind him, the senior royal stood within view, posture controlled, watching without instruction. The guard drew a steady breath, maintaining professional calm as he prepared to open the door, knowing that whatever he encountered inside would define the boundary between protocol and instinct. The handle was cool beneath his glove. The royal guard pressed it down slowly and pushed the preparation room door inward without force, allowing the hinges to move under their own weight so the entry would not sound abrupt. The room beyond was lit by a single overhead fixture, casting a pale circle over a long wooden preparation table and stacked linen crates along the wall. The air carried a faint scent of starch and floor polish. For a fraction of a second, the room appeared empty. Then he registered movement near the far corner, small, restrained, deliberate. The young palace attendant stood near the secondary service exit, shoulders drawn inward, eyes lowered toward the floor. The senior royal was positioned 2 steps away, posture upright, one hand resting lightly against the edge of the table as if steadying himself. No visible struggle, no disarray, yet the distance between them was too narrow for formality. The guard stepped fully inside, maintaining ceremonial bearing rather than urgency. His secondary officer followed, remaining near the doorway. The guard's gaze moved first to the child, assessing physical condition without overt scrutiny. Uniform intact, no visible bruising, breathing controlled but shallow. The child's fingers were clasped tightly at waist level, knuckles pale beneath fabric cuffs. The senior royal turned his head calmly. "There appears to be confusion," he said evenly, voice low and measured. "I requested assistance locating a misplaced document." The explanation was plausible on its surface. The guard acknowledged the statement with a minimal incline of his head, but did not respond verbally. He shifted position slightly, creating a subtle physical barrier between the child and the royal, without touching either. His tone remained formal. "This corridor requires logged clearance for minor staff movement." He kept his words neutral, not accusatory. The senior royal's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "I retain discretionary access within my residence." The guard met his eyes briefly, careful not to prolong the exchange. "Safeguarding statutes apply equally across zones, sir." The room fell quiet. The faint hum of the ventilation vent above them seemed amplified. The child's breathing steadied slightly as the guard's presence stabilized the space. He observed no overt injury, yet distress was evident in posture alone, the slight backward lean, the avoidance of eye contact, the tension in shoulders. He addressed the child gently but formally. "You are not in difficulty. Please step toward the corridor." The words were precise, devoid of emotion, yet carrying assurance through structure. The child hesitated only a moment before moving, passing beside him with small, careful steps. As the child crossed the threshold, the guard signaled the secondary officer to escort to the safeguarding liaison office without drawing external attention. The officer nodded once and guided the child away down the corridor. The senior royal remained still. The guard turned back toward him, maintaining professional distance. "The area will be logged as a security review," he stated. It was both declaration and boundary. The senior royal's gaze sharpened. "You are exceeding procedural necessity." The guard did not respond immediately. He understood the gravity of what had occurred was not defined by visible harm, but by context, unauthorized access, a minor present without documentation, camera interruption preceding entry. He activated his wrist recorder, initiating formal incident documentation as required under safeguarding policy. The faint click of activation was deliberate and audible. In that restrained room, it sounded louder than it was. The senior royal's composure remained intact, yet the atmosphere shifted. Less ambiguity, more calculation. "Deactivate that," the royal said quietly, not raising his voice, but allowing authority to rest beneath the words. The guard did not comply. "Recording active under safeguarding protocol," he replied, tone even, posture unchanged. He documented time, location, present individuals, and absence of clearance. Each detail was spoken plainly, without emphasis. He avoided language that suggested motive. Facts alone would determine interpretation. The senior royal stepped slightly forward, not aggressively, but enough to test the space the guard occupied. The guard held position, shoulders squared, ceremonial insignia catching the overhead light. He was aware that every movement now carried implication beyond this room. "This will be reviewed," the senior royal stated, voice lower. "Of course, sir," the guard answered. No challenge, no concession, only process. Outside the preparation room, footsteps approached, the palace security supervisor responding to the amber-level alert. The guard felt the structure of authority widening around the incident. The supervisor entered, expression carefully neutral. The guard summarized succinctly. Unlogged movement of minor staff, camera interruption, restricted zone access, child relocated for welfare assessment. He omitted speculation. The supervisor listened, eyes moving briefly to the senior royal before returning to the guard. There was no visible accusation in the room, yet the alignment of policy now stood between rank and action. The senior royal adjusted his cufflinks with measured calm.
"A misunderstanding of administrative flexibility," he remarked. The guard did not engage the phrasing. "Escort to engagement remains pending clearance," he said instead. That sentence carried weight. It implied that departure from palace grounds would not occur until internal review stabilized the matter. The supervisor hesitated, only a fraction, then nodded in agreement with procedure. That nod altered the hierarchy in practice, if not in title. Silence settled again, heavier than before. The guard felt no triumph, only responsibility extending outward. The safeguarding liaison would assess the child privately. Findings would determine further reporting. For now, his duty remained containment. He gestured toward the corridor with formal courtesy. "When ready, sir." The senior royal studied him one final moment, an appraisal not of defiance but of resolve, before stepping past him toward the exit. The guard fell into escort position once more, though the dynamic had shifted. He was no longer solely shielding the royal from external threat. He was ensuring procedure-constrained internal privilege. As they walked back toward the main corridor, the palace seemed quieter than earlier, the air cooler along the stone walls. Messages continued to route through internal channels, review protocols activating discreetly. The evening function schedule would compress. Explanations would be crafted carefully. Yet within the guard's steady stride there was clarity. He had neither accused nor ignored. He had intervened within statute. Ahead, the corridor lights brightened toward the formal wing. Behind them, the restricted chamber door closed with a muted click, sealing the moment into official record.
By the time they returned to the grand corridor, the palace had resumed its composed rhythm, though beneath the polished surface a recalibration was underway. The royal guard sensed it in the subtle change of posture among aides, in the slightly prolonged glances from administrative staff who had received coded notifications without details. He maintained escort formation at the senior royal's left rear quarter, distance exact, gaze forward. The earlier deviation was not discussed again. It did not need to be. Procedure would now speak through documentation rather than conversation. The safeguarding liaison transmitted a brief preliminary update through secure channel. The young attendant was physically unharmed, emotional distress present, statement pending formal interview. The guard absorbed the information without visible reaction. His role was not investigative beyond immediate protection. It was containment, preservation of process. As they approached the motorcade entrance once more, additional monitoring protocols activated quietly. A second vehicle was added to the convoy under the pretext of route optimization. Internal surveillance officers adjusted live feeds to include continuous corridor review until further notice. None of this was visible to the public or to waiting guests at the evening function. It was simply a tightening of structure. The senior royal descended the steps toward the vehicle with steady composure, expression restored to ceremonial neutrality. The guard opened the car door, scanned the interior as required, and allowed the royal to enter. The door closed with controlled finality. He took his position in the adjacent security vehicle rather than the primary footboard, an adjustment justified by communications oversight, but strategically chosen. From that vantage point, he retained line of sight and direct channel to the Security Council. The convoy began its movement through the palace gates, tires gliding over stone into the evening street. City lights flickered beyond the perimeter walls. Inside the vehicle, the guard reviewed his incident log once more, ensuring timestamps aligned precisely with camera data. There could be no discrepancy in his account. Any inconsistency would weaken the safeguarding action. His earpiece carried a measured voice from the palace security supervisor. Confidential report required before engagement arrival. he acknowledged. The convoy moved steadily through traffic, escorted by standard police detail. The senior royal's vehicle remained silent, curtains partially drawn. From his perspective, the guard could not see inside, yet he was acutely aware of the presence he was both protecting and containing. Authority misuse within institutional walls did not announce itself loudly. It surfaced in small deviations, unlogged corridors, redirected minors, camera lapses. The guard's responsibility was to recognize those deviations without destabilizing the institution he served. The vehicles slowed as they approached the private venue entrance. Photographers waited beyond barriers, flashes prepared. Public composure would be required within seconds. He transmitted confirmation to the Security Council that initial safeguarding measures had been enacted and that a full written report would follow immediately after the event commenced. A brief pause preceded the response. Proceed. Maintain observational priority. The wording was deliberate. It acknowledged the shift without articulating accusation. The guard stepped out as the convoy stopped, scanning rooftops, windows, crowd lines. He opened the rear door. The senior royal emerged into controlled applause and camera light, expression poised. The guard resumed ceremonial escort, posture immaculate, while knowing that internal observation had replaced unquestioned deference. Inside the venue, lighting softened to amber tones reflecting off polished wood and crystal fixtures. Conversations hushed as the senior royal entered, dignitaries inclining respectfully. The guard positioned himself along the perimeter of the reception hall, selecting a vantage point that allowed uninterrupted view of the royal while maintaining access to all exits. His focus extended beyond external threats now. It included proximity, interaction patterns, deviations from announced schedule. Additional plainclothes officers blended into the room, their placement subtle but intentional. The senior royal engaged in measured conversation with hosts, gestures controlled, demeanor unaltered from countless prior appearances. Nothing in his conduct suggested agitation. That, too, was noted. The guard received confirmation that the young attendant's preliminary statement aligned with observable distress, but alleged no explicit physical harm, only discomfort regarding proximity and tone during the unlogged meeting. Such nuance complicated hierarchy. There would be no immediate spectacle, no visible offense to justify abrupt sanction. Instead, review committees and safeguarding boards would examine context, precedent, and camera interruption causes. The guard understood that his earlier choice to delay departure had shifted responsibility upward. It was no longer solely his burden. He monitored the royals' movement through the hall as speeches began. Applause rose and fell in controlled waves. The guard's eyes tracked subtle indicators, hand placements, conversational distance, requests for private aside. None occurred. The event progressed without irregularity, yet the awareness of scrutiny lingered. Midway through the reception, his wrist device vibrated with confirmation that a confidential safeguarding report had been formally registered with the Palace Security Council under sealed review. He felt neither relief nor satisfaction, only steadiness. The institution would now decide how to reconcile privilege with policy. As the evening concluded, the senior royal prepared to depart. Their eyes met briefly across the hall. There was no hostility in the look, only acknowledgment of altered equilibrium. The guard inclined his head once, professional and restrained. The return convoy proceeded without delay. Back within palace grounds, the atmosphere had shifted subtly from ceremony to containment. Administrative lights remained on in offices that would normally darken at this hour.
The guard escorted the senior royal to his residential wing entrance and paused at the threshold. "Good evening, sir," he said formally. "Good evening," came the reply, tone unreadable. The door closed. The guard remained in place a moment longer, ensuring secure seal before stepping back into the corridor. His duty had not ended with the event. It had expanded. Surveillance protocols would remain elevated until council review concluded. The young attendant would be reassigned temporarily, shielded from visibility. No public statement would emerge unless necessary. He walked the corridor slowly, boots echoing against stone, the palace once again quiet. Protection of the crown required vigilance against external danger. Protection of those within its walls required something more restrained, an insistence on procedure even when authority resisted it. He reached the operations room where the monitors still hummed under cool air. The footage of the restricted corridor remained archived, sealed within formal record. He removed his gloves and placed them precisely on the console. The night would continue without ceremony, and from this point forward, observation would not merely guard the crown, it would guard against it.
The following morning arrived without announcement, pale winter light filtering through the high corridor windows and settling across the stone floors in muted bands. The Royal Guard reported to the internal security chamber at 0700 hours, uniform pressed, posture aligned, expression composed. The palace functioned outwardly as it always had: staff rotations, scheduled briefings, routine deliveries. But within the administrative wing, doors that usually remained open were closed. The safeguarding report he had filed during the previous evening had triggered a formal council review under confidential statute. He entered the chamber when summoned, noting the presence of the palace security supervisor, the safeguarding liaison, and 2 senior administrative officers whose authority extended into household governance. Their expressions were restrained, not accusatory, not supportive, measured. He stood at attention until instructed to speak. The supervisor requested a chronological account beginning with the CCTV interruption. The guard delivered it without embellishment, detailing timestamps, visual observations, corridor status, and his decision to delay departure under procedural anomaly. He described the child's posture and the absence of physical injury in objective terms, avoiding interpretive language. When asked whether he believed the senior royal's conduct constituted misconduct, he answered precisely, "I observed unauthorized minor movement in a restricted zone following a camera lapse. I intervened under safeguarding mandate." He did not speculate beyond that boundary. The administrative officers exchanged brief glances, noting the neutrality of his phrasing. The safeguarding liaison confirmed that the young attendant's statement described feeling pressured to enter the service corridor and uncomfortable with the proximity, though no explicit coercion had been alleged. Emotional distress, however, had been recorded. The room remained quiet for several seconds after the liaison finished. The weight of institutional balance settled heavily in the silence. One administrative officer asked whether alternative action could have been taken, whether the escort could have proceeded without delay while the matter was reviewed privately afterward. The guard answered without defensiveness. Departure would have removed supervisory oversight during an unresolved safeguarding anomaly. His voice remained even. The supervisor nodded slightly, acknowledging procedural logic. The question was not about correctness, it was about consequence. Delaying a senior royal's engagement carried diplomatic implications, yet failing to intervene would have undermined safeguarding statutes, recently strengthened in response to prior institutional criticism. The guard understood the council was not only evaluating the senior royals' conduct, they were assessing the resilience of the policies themselves. He was dismissed temporarily while they deliberated. Outside the chamber, the corridor felt cooler than usual, the air still. He remained standing rather than seeking a seat, hands clasped behind his back, eyes forward. Staff passed without acknowledgement, aware only that review was underway. He felt no anxiety in the dramatic sense, only an acute awareness that outcomes would shape precedent. If his actions were deemed excessive, future interventions might hesitate. If upheld, policy would gain weight beyond ceremony. After 20 minutes, the door reopened. He was summoned back inside. The supervisor informed him that provisional findings supported his invocation of safeguarding protocol. Further review regarding the camera lapse and access override would proceed under restricted audit. The senior royal had been informed that contact with minor staff would require dual authorization pending investigation. The language was careful, devoid of accusation, yet unmistakably corrective. The guard inclined his head once. There was no praise offered, only confirmation that procedure would stand. With the council's provisional decision recorded, operational adjustments unfolded quietly across the palace. The young attendant was reassigned to an administrative training unit away from residential corridors, not as punishment, but as protective distance. Counseling sessions were scheduled discreetly. The camera lapse in the West Service Corridor was traced to a manual override executed under a senior access code. Audit teams began examining authorization logs with forensic precision. The Royal Guard resumed his post along the primary interior corridor, though awareness among colleagues had subtly shifted. A junior officer approached briefly during rotation change and stated only, "Understood." It was not commendation, merely acknowledgement of the standard upheld. Later that afternoon, the guard was summoned privately to the residential wing. The senior royal stood near the threshold, attire informal, but posture unaltered. No aides were present. The air between them held restrained gravity. "The council has informed me of procedural adjustments," the royal said evenly. The guard remained at regulation distance. "Yes, sir." A pause followed. "You acted within policy," the royal continued, tone controlled. "It was not an apology, it was a recognition of framework." The guard answered, "My duty is to apply statute consistently." Their eyes met briefly, not adversarial, not conciliatory, but assessing, authority and enforcement standing in balanced tension. The senior royal inclined his head once and withdrew into the residence without further comment. The exchange lasted less than a minute, yet it marked a recalibration more significant than any public gesture. That evening, the guard returned to the operations room, where the monitors cast steady light against the cool air. The restricted corridor camera now displayed continuous feed without interruption, audit markers visible in the corner of the screen. Safeguarding alerts had been elevated across all minor staff zones. Procedure had tightened, not loudly, not publicly, but tangibly. He removed his gloves and placed them beside the console, reflecting not on confrontation, but on continuity. Institutions endured not because they were flawless, but because internal correction remained possible when vigilance did not yield to rank. Beyond the palace walls, the city moved in ordinary rhythm, unaware of the recalibration within. The young attendant's statement would remain sealed. The senior royal would continue public duties under refined supervision, and the guard would continue his watch, not as an adversary to authority, nor as its unquestioning shield, but as its boundary. The corridor lights dimmed gradually as night protocols engaged. He stood alone for a moment before resuming patrol, boots steady against stone, knowing that safeguarding did not conclude with one intervention. It persisted, quietly, sustained by those willing to freeze movement when something small, an open latch, a missing log entry, a brief interruption in footage, did not align with the order it was meant to protect.